Hi guys, here's Paula, the crazy ozone lady from thepowerofozone.com, and today I will continue with the topic of vitamin C and ozone therapy, which is a little bit kind of like a never-ending topic. It always comes up. And so today I will try to answer the question whether you should take vitamin C with ozone therapy. And so let's look at a study in order to answer this question, a study that was performed around 30 years ago. So the study was called Oxidative Damage to Plasma Constituents by Ozone, was published in 1992 in the Federation of European Biochemical Societies by Carol E. Cross and a bunch of other people. And so what they did is the following. And so, by the way, this is like a tip how to read studies, or what is the fastest and the best way to read a study. So if you want to do this, you basically go to the materials and methods section. This is really the most important part of any study. So when you read a study, you don't want to read it from top to bottom. You want to really just read the most important parts, because studies are written in such a dry way, and they're also always, nearly always, contain stuff which is not not important, and so you can't really read a study from start to finish. So you just want to read the most important parts, and the most important is the materials and methods. So this section basically describes the study design. So it describes exactly what was done in a study. And just by reading this section, in most cases, you can already tell whether the study is useful and helpful and informative or not, just by reading this one section. Okay, so what they did here in this case, what they did is they drew blood from healthy adult male volunteers, age range 30 to 60, into heparinized tubes. So that means that there was some heparin, which is an anticoagulant, in the tubes that prevents the clotting of blood. They centrifuged to obtain plasma. So centrifuge, it basically means they spun it at really high resolution rates. And so what it looks like when you centrifuge blood, so it looks kind of like this. Although, honestly, I'm not sure this is a real picture, because I remember from my work at a doctor's office where I was working at the lab. So in most cases, it was the plasma part and the blood part, they were more or less like equal amounts. So this, for me, this looks like there's too much plasma. So basically, plasma, this is this yellow liquid, and this dark stuff, those are the blood cells. And so when you centrifuge blood, this is what happens, they separate. So they took just the blood plasma in this study, and they put 5 milliliters aliquots. I had to actually look up aliquots, what this means, and aliquots means even quantities, were placed in Falcon dishes. So Falcon dishes, so this is a Falcon dish. And so they did that. They put the plasma in those dishes, closed the containers. They were kept at 37 degrees Celsius, which is, I believe, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and exposed to a humidified, constantly monitored level of 16 ppm, so parts per million ozone, and 5% CO2 and 95% air, as described in another study. Control plasma was exposed to an identical gas stream but without O3. So, okay, so here, just by reading this section, you can already tell, okay, is this really pertinent? Is this really relevant to ozone therapy? And, there are reasons to be a little skeptical, although I do think that this study still contains valuable information that we can draw from. But the reason to be skeptical is because, first of all, so there's air used, air and CO2. And when you do ozone therapy, there is no air involved. So when you do ozone therapy, you use pure oxygen or oxygen of at least 90% purity. So during ozone therapy, you use oxygen between 90 and 99% purity. And only a small fraction of that is ozone. And this is not what was done here. They used air and CO2, and what is also unusual that the CO2 amount was that high, because the normal CO2 content of air is 0.04%, and here they had 5%. So their amount of CO2 was more than 100 times what air normally contains in CO2. So we don't know whether that's relevant or not. They also don't explain why they used so much CO2, and we don't know what effect this had on the results of the study. Okay, but moving on. So what was found? So those are the findings of the study, the results of the study. So you see, they looked here at, hold on a second, you know what? Because you cannot see my mouse, so let me use here this view. Okay, so let's go up here to this graph. Okay, so this graph here, it shows the results of the study. Okay, I want to, so that you can see it, possibly big. Okay, sorry about this. All those movements. Okay, here. So you see, they checked here. So here on this side, you see those are the four constituents of the blood plasma that they looked at. So this was alpha tocopherol, so basically vitamin E, and so this is here. This is this top. You see this top line here. Then they looked at protein thiols. Those were the solid squares here. Okay, this is this line here. Then they looked at ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid, this is vitamin C, and this is this line here. And they also looked at uric acid. Now, uric acid, this is another antioxidant which is contained in blood. And this is this graph here. Okay, and so basically they had a certain starting concentration of all those constituents: vitamin E, protein thiols, vitamin C, and uric acid. And so the plasma was exposed to those really low levels of ozone, and I will explain a bit how much ozone this really was. And it was exposed for 4 hours, and as you can see, the vitamin C levels after 4 hours went down to basically zero. So this shows that vitamin C does degrade, that ozone does degrade vitamin C, okay, because those are the vitamin C levels, and they went down to nearly zero after 4 hours of exposure to really low ozone levels. And now, so the question is, how high were those ozone levels? How are they comparable to what is used in ozone therapy? And so they use here 60 ppm of O3, 16 parts per million. And so, but let's remember that they use this in an air mixture, air and CO2 mixture. And again, this is not what is used in ozone therapy. So how much does this, what's the calculation if you wanted to know how much that would be if we used it in ozone therapy? And so this is what Dr. Viebahn did. So Dr. Viebahn, she's a really world-renowned ozone expert, and she actually used those findings of that study in one of her books, and she left out uric acid, and she also left out the thiol proteins, and she only left vitamin E, so alpha tocopherol, and the ascorbic acid. And now this is in German, so let me explain what she says. So basically she says that those 16 ppm of ozone, that they're equivalent to 32 milligrams per cubic meters of ozone. Now, so 1 cubic meter is 1000 liters. So this is basically 0.032 milligrams per liter. Now, the normal concentration of normal, like let's say like a low ozone concentration during ozone therapy that is used is 20 milligrams per liter. Okay, so this was like several hundred times less than what is used in ozone therapy. So this was a minuscule, a tiny, tiny amount of ozone, and this had this quite dramatic impact on the vitamin C levels in blood plasma. So again, is this relevant for ozone therapy or not? I believe that yes, this can be relevant. I think that this is something that one should be aware of. Now, some may say, okay, now this is blood plasma. This may be maybe just relevant for intravenous ozone treatments and not for home ozone treatments. And this may be true, although I would say I think that we should also keep this in mind when doing home ozone treatments. All right, so I would not dismiss those findings as being only relevant for intravenous ozone treatments, because it seems that the vitamin C levels were that sensitive to those really minuscule amounts of ozone. Another argument, counter argument that one could say here is that basically this was not done in a living person, but basically in a dish. So it was just a laboratory setting. The plasma, as explained, was transferred from humans into those dishes. And now, so again, it's not clear how relevant this is to a human being, because in a human being, there may be other factors at play. There may be other things happening, so that maybe the destruction of vitamin C would not be that dramatic. But in any case, for those who do want to take this into consideration and who say, okay, yeah, I think it's definitely good to take vitamin C when doing ozone therapy, and I belong to one of those who now say, yes, I do think that one should supplement with vitamin C when doing, especially when doing like a very intense course of ozone therapy. Then the next question is, okay, so how much vitamin C should you take? Which type? And how should you space it apart from ozone, or is this maybe not relevant at all? So, okay, so let's look at this question. How much vitamin C should you take? And here the answer is with so many things, is it depends, right? So it depends, I believe, to a large degree on your diet. What does your diet look like? If your diet is very rich in natural high vitamin C sources like citrus fruits, other fresh fruits, and fresh vegetables, then you may not need to supplement a lot with vitamin C. You may not need to supplement with it at all. It also depends how much ozone you do. If you spend ozonating yourself, if you spend hours ozonating yourself every day, then you may have a much higher need for vitamin C than someone who does an ozone treatment maybe just once a week. So, but in general, I would say taking several hundred milligrams to up to 5 grams of vitamin C per day, I think is a good ballpark figure. But it also depends of how much vitamin C you can take. So some people have problems with taking vitamin C. It is hard on their digestion, and they can't take that much. So this is also another factor to consider. Okay, so next question is, which type of vitamin C should you take? Now, there are different types. There's the classical, which is the ascorbic acid. Then there's the buffered type, calcium ascorbate. Then there's stuff derived from rose hips. Then there is liposomal vitamin C, and then there's also natural sources, just from citrus fruits, lemon, lime juice, and so on. So I think, in my opinion, many others may contradict me, but I think it is not so important which type you take. So whatever you are fine with, whatever you have no problems digesting, whatever you tolerate well, take that. And some may say, okay, is it really enough to just take vitamin C through citrus fruits, just by sprinkling some lemon juice over my salmon, for example? And I believe that, yes, I believe that this is enough. And that although natural lemon and lime juice, when you just look at the pure vitamin C content, is minuscule. So I think what is it, 3 ounces of lemon juice is contain, I believe it's several a dozen, like maybe I think 30 or 40 or 50 milligrams of vitamin C. So this is also tiny amounts. But the reason why I believe that this may still be enough is because in the year 2020 I actually had my vitamin C levels tested. That was at the 10th of July 2020, and they were very, very low. They were basically non-existent. And now this might have been, the reason for this may have been a combination between my carnivore diet, so basically a diet where I did not take in any vitamin C through food, and the fact that I was doing a lot of ozone therapy at the same time. But there may have been other factors at play that I'm still trying to figure out. But in any case, I tested extremely low for vitamin C, and I also had the symptoms to match a vitamin C deficiency. Like, for example, I had bleeding gums, I had shortness of breath, felt fatigued, and so forth. And anyway, so this was on the 10th of July 2020, and so right after I saw the results, I started consuming citrus fruit, so juices from citrus fruit, lemon and lime juice, mostly lemon, and I then retested my vitamin C levels 20 days later, and they were 75% above the maximum range. I also did take some ascorbic acid, but not a lot. So mostly this was just through fruits, and it seems that this was enough to completely reestablish my vitamin C levels. So yes, I think that really any type of vitamin C source that you're doing fine with is acceptable. Okay, next question is, how should you space vitamin C apart from ozone therapy? And is this a concern at all? So, well, as we have just seen on that graph, right? So there is a definite cancellation of vitamin C through ozone. So it is clear that those two work basically antagonistically to each other to some extent. Yes, it is true that high doses of vitamin C also work as a pro-oxidant, but whatever amounts of vitamin C you take, there's a time before it builds up. So during that time, it may be that you will basically already destroy. I'm sorry. So it's possible that this during the time that you're taking vitamin C, that this will negate some of the ozone byproducts, the ozonides that are doing, their magic, their good stuff inside you after having done ozone therapy. So the point is, sorry, that was a little convoluted. The point is that, yes, I think it is a good idea to space apart ozone therapy from vitamin C if you want to get the maximum out of both of those treatments. Although I believe that this is most important if you do ozone therapy at a doctor's office. So if you do some intravenous type of ozone therapy, and the reason for this is because they tend to be much more expensive. And so if you do ozone, get an ozone IV, and right after that you get some vitamin C into you, then you will lose some effect of the ozone IV. So you will be basically paying for something that you were not able to get the most effect out of, right? So I believe spacing those things apart. So if you, let's say, if you get an ozone IV at, let's say, 10 a.m. in the morning, then I would do the vitamin C either the next day or several hours afterwards. So let's say at 12 noon or somewhere in the afternoon. So this should give the ozone enough time to really do most of what it should do before you introduce the vitamin C. And also the other way around, so vitamin C, it will take a few hours, 2 to 3 hours, to go down to low levels after a vitamin C IV. So if you got vitamin C IV, you know, more or less exactly the same thing. If you get a vitamin C IV, let's say at 10 a.m., that also like at noon, 1 or 2 p.m., you want to get the ozone therapy. Again, this is if you want to get the most out of those two treatments. Now, if you do ozone therapy at home, this is not so important because if you have already the your ozone equipment at home set up, then this is something very, very cheap. So even if, let's say, it should happen so let's say if it happened that you took too much vitamin C, so much that it actually negated all the vaginal insufflation that you just did half an hour ago, you know, this is not such a big deal because you can just do another vaginal insufflation half an hour later or later in the day or the next day, right? So I don't think that this is so important, the spacing apart of those two things when you do home ozone treatments. Also, should you space them really like one after another, then you know it's not that something bad will happen. It's not dangerous or anything. It's just that, in my opinion, you will not get the most out of both treatments. Probably, maybe, you know. In the end, you know, try out whatever works for you. There are many doctors who actually do ozone therapy and vitamin C IVs right after the other, and they see results in people. Only that in those cases, of course, you cannot say, okay, was the positive effect that was achieved, was this mainly because of the ozone therapy, or was this mainly because of the vitamin C? You know, it's difficult to tell. So, but yeah, those are my thoughts. So, you know, and especially for people who are on diets which have a very low vitamin C content, so on carnivore diets or ketogenic diets, or also diets which are high in carbs and sugars, then you want an extra intake of vitamin C if you're doing ozone therapy also at the same time. And yeah, the reason why it is important to take in vitamin C when you're on a high sugar, high carb diet is because carbs and so glucose is used up vitamin C is used up during the metabolism of glucose. So the more glucose, sugars, and carbs you take in, the more your body needs vitamin C to be able to deal with the glucose. So yeah, that would be it. Now this was kind of like an excerpt, or like a tasting of my upcoming book, The Ultimate Guide to Home Ozone Therapy. If you want to be notified when this book comes out, and it should come out like in around a week's time, then please subscribe to the newsletter and you will be able to buy the book at a discount for a limited amount of time. So there is also a link in the description below the video, or just go to thepowerofozone.com/news. And we'll go from there. So thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.